This is me, Julian, and over here we have Jeneline.
Good morning, everyone.
I'm going to be teaching my introduction to Aristotle class today, and then Jeneline is going to teach
Intro to Communism on Friday.
on Friday, exactly. Okay, here's the Instagram. We're going to go live in just one moment. We always have such high quality production values on
It's
this.
high concept.
You want to move that to the left a tiny bit? There we go.
Second work.
All right. Is that working? Somehow the live never really works on Instagram the first time around. There's going to be a day where we have it all synced up properly. We're also recording this as a podcast for those of you listening. Thank you for bearing with us as we try to get all of this set up.
We try not to crash into any microphones to
There we go.
deafen you.
Checking connection. You are now live. Excellent.
Woo-hoo.
Hello, everybody. Oh. There you go. That lasted a long time. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Introduction to Aristotle class that I'm going to be teaching today. My name is Julian. Over here next to me, we have Jeneline, who is my co-teacher.
I'm going to be the laughter you hear in the background. The laughter ex machina.
Laughter ex machina. Jeneline teaches a class every Friday. Oh my God. At some point, we need to have a budget for...
If only we had some device that could hold a phone.
We need a budget for like some kind of device that will hold the phone. Okay. You're laughing at me, aren't you? It's easy.
I'm laughing with you. I'm laughing with you.
Yeah? You're not allowed to laugh with me. You can only laugh at me. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Monday morning Introduction to Philosophy class. This is going to be an Introduction to Aristotle class. I'm going to be teaching. Jeneline is going to teach on Friday. We take turns, essentially. And if you're joining us for the very first time today, welcome. It's wonderful that you're joining us here for our learning community. Every class is entirely standalone. That means you don't have to have any previous experience. You can just jump right in here. It's always the perfect place to start.
There's no required reading.
No required reading. And it is part of a series called Introduction to Western Philosophy. And so we've done the pre-Socratics, we've done Plato, and today we're going to be covering Aristotle. This project here of teaching online for free is only possible because of the generous support of our patrons. Yes. And so if you're a patron watching this, thank you so much. It really means the world to us that we can keep doing this. A year ago, when Jeneline and I left academia, we started teaching online for free. And we had about, 5 to 10 students. Yeah. By now we have students from around the world joining us, which is amazing. I personally, and I think you too, believe that education should be a right, not a privilege. You should not have to go broke to go to university. And that is our dream. And so we're super happy to keep these classes free for everybody. That means a lot to us. And thank you to all of our patrons who keep that possible. If you'd like to become a patron, that would actually be super. That would really, really help us. This is currently our only source of income. And if you become a patron, you'll also get access to bonus discussions for every class. We upload lecture notes, study guides, master classes. There's all kinds of perks behind the scenes. And most of all, I think I can say this, we have a very fun community on Discord.
Yes.
That's really been the best part for me, is that Discord has really become a community of its own.
Yes.
And that's been very cool.
Yeah.
So anyway.
We love having you.
Thank you guys for watching.
Yeah.
You were going to say?
Yeah. I said, thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate you guys. And I think we're just going to launch right in. We're going to do a 1-hour class on Aristotle. And then after that, we're going to host a 1-hour bonus discussion on the Discord. So if you'd like to join that bonus discussion, send us a message and we'll get you signed up to the Discord. Starts at just $5 a month. There's a beautiful synchronicity here, which is that we have exactly the same amount of people watching on the Instagram as on the YouTube. You can watch this either on Instagram or on YouTube. We try to make it available in both formats, I think. Do you want to just start?
Yeah.
All right. Aristotle. It's always like finding the starting point is always the hardest part. So let's just jump right in.
Sip of coffee is a good point to start.
One of the things that I've always said is that the purest act of love is to betray somebody. And what I mean by that is, like, it's only really betrayal if you really have a strong connection to that person. You think about Judas, for example. Like, Judas wasn't just a random person. Like, Judas was part of the inner circle. And you have to be a part of that inner circle in order to really betray somebody in a fruitful way. And this is something that is really important when you understand Aristotle. Because a lot of people and I've been one of those people, have argued that the history of Western philosophy can be taught as a division, as two branches between Plato and Aristotle. And to some degree, that's true. But in this class, I'm also going to suggest why that might be a simplification. The two branches I'm referring to here are what we today call continental theory, which goes all the way back to the Platonic idea of the dialectic, and analytic philosophy, which goes back to the idea of, it's not empiricism, by the way. A lot of people say that Aristotle is empirical. Aristotle is not empirical. He is not testing things in a scientific fashion, but it goes back to the idea that the truth of something lies not in the ideal form somewhere outside the world, but lies embedded within the objects in the world themselves. So those are the two pathways, if you will. And Aristotle was a student, a pupil. Wow, this is my German coming out. A pupil, a pupil within Plato's school. Plato's school being the academy. And Aristotle started his own school following the death of Plato, which he called the Lyceum. And in a sense, we can see both of those in today's, in contemporary terms, right? We have academies, like to be an academic at a university, and we have the Lyceum in France, the lycée, the schools, etc. And so there's a little bit of a difference between Plato's academy and Aristotle's Lyceum to begin with, which is that the academy is essentially an elite club where Plato surrounds himself with the brightest and the most beautiful of Greek men. At least according to Plato. And so it's a very selective club. It's not open to the public. And one of the things that Aristotle does is that he supposedly, as far as we know, taught his own students in the morning, and in the evening he would teach the public, which I feel like I can relate to a little bit because we do these classes in the morning, and then I go onto my TikTok live stream in the evening and just sort of talk to random people. Anyway, very humble comparison here. And so we have these two schools. So Aristotle is a student of Plato's. And Plato actually has a nickname for Aristotle when Aristotle's still in school, which he calls him a foal. Because a foal will kick the
like
mother.
a fowl.
A fowl, yeah.
A baby horse.
Is it a fowl?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I always said foal. I'm mispronouncing words left and right here today. Fowl, okay. Because a fowl, according to Plato, will kick the mother when it's drunk enough milk. And so that's Aristotle, in a sense, is kicking Plato when he's had enough of Plato's theories.
That is the betrayal in love as well, I suppose.
Yeah, no, there's a relationship between love and betrayal always, and Aristotle, but Aristotle is closer to Plato in some ways than people realize. Anyway, we're gonna sort of explain that more as we continue here, but I'm gonna sort of slowly build up the argument. And if you've watched any of these classes before, then you also know that all of the themes here have echoes to the previous class. So you can always go back and watch the previous class and it will make more sense. It's like, I see it kind of like a TV show where you can watch it as a standalone episode, but if you see all the other episodes, it's like, oh, okay, this all makes sense. So one of the key differences here between Plato and Aristotle, and this is super helpful if you want to get into philosophy in general, is the difference between the universal and the particular, between the general, the all, and the particular being the singular or the, particular of something. For example, you could say that all men are is a sex and a gender, and I am a particular man. I am one man. I'm a poor excuse for man, essentially, right? So we have the universal condition of being a man, and then we have me as man, particular entity. That's something, and so it's sort of to keep in mind. But here's one of the funny things about the universal in particular. They're not just really separate. Think about this. If you've ever played have you heard of Pokemon, right? The Pokemon card game. So not the game, but Pokemon the card game. What makes Pokemon the card game different from other card games is a pretty simple feature, which is that the cards in a regular deck, they're limited. It's like, how many cards? Do you know this? You're a card player.
Well, usually there's 52 cards in a deck.
There you go. Okay, Jenny knows how to shuffle. I just go, Jenny's a shuffler. So yeah, 52 cards in a deck, and that's never going to change. I mean, there's no expansion packs to a regular deck of cards. And the rules are specifically built around there being 52 cards in the deck. That's sort of set.
Yeah.
Now, what happens with Pokemon or other games, well, I don't know if it's true for other games like Magic the Gathering, but it's definitely true with Pokemon, is as more expansion sets come out of the card game, the rules change. And so the particular cards are not bound by a universal set of rules. They're actually, in a sense, always rewriting the rules from within.
That's a really good example.
The more cards you collect, the more the universal condition of the game changes. It's sort of constantly in flux. And so that's something that we're going to look at a little bit here, is like how the universal can be subject to the particular, in a sense, and the universal becomes conditioned by the, if that, is that something that makes sense?
Yeah.
I've got an example here that's kind of a famous story, again, of like this difference, so keep clarifying it. All you have to do is you have to know 3 composers. Beethoven, Mozart, and Rossini. You don't really have to know Rossini, but you have to know Beethoven and Mozart.
But you should know Rossini, but...
True. Do you want to hum some Rossini for us this morning? I actually don't really like Rossini all that much. Anyway, and so there's this famous story where Rossini is asked, which he prefers, Beethoven or Mozart. And in order to understand the story, you have to understand a little bit what the relationship of Beethoven to Mozart is. So Mozart is basically this revolution within music. It's like we feel like it's commonplace to say that you can't go beyond Mozart, that Mozart is just like the singular genius. Beethoven is considered the first person after Mozart who actually manages to drive music in a new direction. Because after Mozart, everyone's just imitating Mozart. Everything's just kind of like...
Including Rossini, but anyway.
Including Rossini, yes. And Beethoven's the first time who really has like a revolution beyond Mozart. But it's a revolution that only makes sense within the universe of Mozart. And if you go back, you can find this on IGTV or YouTube. It's like the first lecture in the Introduction to Ideology series that I did. I actually did a whole class on Beethoven, if you're interested. The very small subset of people here who want to get into Beethoven. Anyway, and so Rossini is asked, who do you prefer, Beethoven or Mozart? And Rossini says, I need to get this right. Rossini famously says, well, Beethoven was a genius. No, okay, sorry. I hate this when I do stories wrong.
Sorry.
I need to get it right because they're like theoretically important. Okay. So Rossini's asked which composer, like, what do you think about Beethoven? And he says, Beethoven is the greatest. And then the interviewer says, what do you think about Mozart? And his reply is, Mozart is the only composer. And so here we have a difference between the greatest composer, the I don't know, the GOAT, as we say, the greatest of all time. And he says Beethoven is the greatest, and Mozart is the only. And here we actually have exactly what the relationship is between the universal and the particular within the Platonic and then Aristotelian universe, which is the universal is the condition of everything. It's the one all. In other words, Mozart is like, as one of the commenters said, a state of mind. It's like a purity. It's an entity unto itself. It is incomparable. It cannot be measured. It's pure genius. Whereas the idea is that Beethoven, being a genius who reacted to Mozart, is the greatest.
Yeah.
Because his greatness can be measured against the all-encompassing genius of Mozart. And it's a very clever answer that Rossini gives there. Like it's a very strong awareness of how history and art move forward as like this constant mediation.
Yeah.
And okay, so we have here the greatest and the only in a sense. There's another way we can think about this, and this relates directly to the previous class. And actually in the essay that I uploaded to the Patreon, because on Patreon you can find all these classes as an essay, last week I referred to this. And that's the difference between, I'm sort of curious what you think about this. It's the difference between the eternal and the infinite. Right? We have eternity and we have infinity. And there's a reason, like in the Avengers, why we call it infinity stones, but not eternal stones. They're clearly not eternal. I mean, right? Okay. Anyway, infinity and eternal. What is the difference between something which is infinite and something which is eternal? Something which is infinite is, in a sense, like Mozart in the story. It's infinite because it is only. It is infinite because it exists outside the principle of time itself. The eternal is all time. It is a unity of all time. It is a sense like, does that make sense? So we have the infinite, which stands outside of time, and eternal is all time.
Right.
And so the eternal, in a sense, is a worldly, if you will, particular measurement of the infinite. Something is eternal. It is forever. It is all of time within that which cannot be surpassed, which is the infinite. And so the eternal is actually, in and of itself, actually a finite condition. Even though it's, you see what I mean? It's an internal limit within the infinite. We can only really make sense of the infinite by means of the idea of the internal. The infinite by itself doesn't exist. Is this getting too
because
technical?
then it just becomes about perception.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
And this is also something that I talk about where it's like we need human finitude in order to understand what eternity even means. So we have here again like the difference between what he said, like Mozart is the only one and Beethoven is the greatest. You know, it's kind of funny because there's something that I don't know if this will make sense, but secretly Christians are a lot more radical than Muslims. Because think about it, the Muslim, what do we associate with Muslims? What Muslims say, what they sort of part of the cant.
God willing.
No, well that's inshallah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Allahu Akbar.
Oh, okay.
Right? God is great.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, God is great is a pretty big deal. But that's like saying Beethoven is great. Whereas the Christians say God is all. And that's a much more radical thing. Like Muslims don't say God is all. They essentially say God is great. He's the greatest, and he's creating greatness on earth.
Well, it also goes back to one of the 10 Commandments, thou shalt have no other God before me, which sort of implies the existence of a pantheon of gods rather than...
Yeah, sure, exactly. I mean, for the Christian idea of like the Trinity is a much more like it's a much more frightening in a sense like universe where nothing can really exist outside of God. There's no space that you can go to take a break from God. And in a sense, like the Islamic universe gives you more space in that sense for individual subjectivity because like not everything you are always doing is constantly within the parameters of godliness. So this is sort of important. And then you think about Judaism and the rites and all that stuff. I'm totally going to call you out. I'm going to call you out.
Sorry. I've been drinking too much coffee.
Johnny's been drinking too much coffee and her stomach is unhappy with her. Do you need a hydration check?
Yeah, probably. Thank you.
So God is the greatest, and then God is the only, right? Here we already have two ways of thinking about this. Okay, we're just sort of building up a little bit of things here. So I was reading about the Israel-Palestine conflict. You may wonder, what does the Israel-Palestine conflict have to do with Aristotle? But I will demonstrate eventually. And one of the things that I realized reading about this is that one of the things that's really contested within Palestine, rightly so, is the idea of coexistence. And coexistence is actually something that you see a lot on bumper stickers here in the United States. It's like a bumper sticker is a sticker on the back of your car, and usually people put like jokes on it or like, this is the kind of person I want you to think I am, etc. Yeah.
Well, usually the coexist is like written out in different religious symbols.
Yeah. Okay, so you're jumping ahead here a little bit, but that's fine. Yes, so there's a bumper sticker that has coexist with different religious symbols on it because it's a bumper sticker that belongs to the Unitarian Church. And so if you're part of the Unitarian Church, you're demonstrating with the coexist that you believe that all the faiths should sort of coexist equally. We can do a whole thing on Unitarianism and my issues with it, but that's for another time. We can do that in the bonus discussion. But what's funny here is the idea of coexistence is similar to the idea of tolerance. It belies that there's something which is more important than the other thing that sustains the universe of coexistence. Like coexistence doesn't just come into being naturally. There has to be some way in which coexistence is formalized, or if you will, enforced. And the Palestinians are more aware of this than anybody else because coexistence for the Palestinians simply means to live under oppression and to live in an apartheid state and to say this is as good as it's going to get and to not dream of anything else. Coexistence for the Palestinians means losing increasingly the right to be a political entity within the state of Israel. And so coexistence, which we think of as like a liberal, humanist, tolerant like perspective, within Palestine is increasingly seen for what it is, which is an ideological sham, essentially. And so the question is always, when we have something that is supposed to coexist, that's supposed to be mutually constitutive, to what extent does that actually belie a certain exception, something which doesn't actually coexist, something which has to not coexist in order to keep the illusion of coexistence in place. Now, the Marxist term for this was always the part of no part, or the post-Marxist term. And the idea here was that for every universal thing, you have an exception. It's like every rule has its exception. And the insight that Marx has, and I'm going to explain to you why we can go all the way back to Aristotle here. The insight that Marx has is that it's not just that every rule has an exception, it's that the rule is sustained by the exception, that the exception is necessary to the universal itself. And so we don't just have a mediation between the universal and the particular. We actually have an excessive particularity which sustains the idea of the universal itself. This is a bit technical, but I'll explain a little bit further. Are you okay with this?
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I've talked about this before. And so the Marxist idea has always been that the particular actually contains the universal. And all you have to do in order to have a revolution is to realize that the particular is actually that which contains the universal, in the same sense that like the working class becomes the universal class, etc., and so on. And so there's a reversal that happens. That's what revolution is. Revolution isn't just saying off with their heads, etc. Revolution is specifically that there's a perspectival shift that takes place where the relationship between the universal and the particular becomes totally rewritten. When I was a kid, like one of the popular Disney movies was the Bug's Life. And one of the things in Bug's Life was always this, and this was true for a lot of kids' movies back then, was that, you know, the ants were oppressed, and the ants were oppressed by the, I don't know, what they are? Crickets? No, not crickets. What are they called? The ones that jump. Are those crickets?
Grasshoppers.
Thank you. The ants are oppressed by the grasshoppers, and the ants just have to realize. But what is it that they realize? Supposedly the ants are supposed to realize that they're more numerous. This was always the narrative. It's like once you realize that you're more numerous, you can take over. Once you realize that you actually have the power, you take over. And that's not the Marxist insight at all. Like that's actually, it's funny because like that's not how Marxism works. Marxism is not about saying actually we have more people than you and we can take over. It's specifically about realizing what your role within the class system is. The goal isn't to take over the system. The goal is to get rid of the system. If you think about it, it's like even within a case system, it doesn't have to be class. Like in India, you have the case system with, what is it, like not deplorables, what are the ones? Yeah, exactly. The untouchables, thank you. The untouchables. And the idea is that, in a sense, you need the untouchables to sustain the overall hierarchy, both in the literal sense, in that they do the work that nobody else wants to do, but also in the sense that the hierarchy only works because no one wants to be an untouchable. I mean, you can't even, like, it's totally separate. It's the part of no part.
Well, that's, in a sense, what maintains the discipline of it, or the fear of the system.
Yeah, there's always that one thing that is, like, outside of the system that maintains the system. In the same way that coexistence belies not just unity between things, but always, like, some unacknowledged symbolization or formalization that constitutes it. And this is true for a lot of things. Like, it's not just true for oppression. You can think about how it works for love. And Aristotle, in many ways, was a philosopher of love, who was very interested in love. And one of the things about love is, like, we have this truism today, which is that you should love someone for who they truly are, which is impossible. You can't love someone for who they truly are, because that would mean determining what are they truly, and also determining what are they not truly. And you would have to say, well, what are the things that are predicates for true love? In other words, love being equality, and you're looking for the predicates of love. These are all Aristotelian terms, right? We have predicates and qualities. And you think, well, what is true love? True love is, okay, let's see what true love should not be. Should not be influenced by money. Should it be influenced by good looks? Should it be influenced by a sense of humor? Like, what are the traits that we consider
family choice?
Positive predicates of love, of pure love, and non-positive predicates of pure love. And you realize you can't. It's impossible to have love for love itself, pure love, as much as the Christians would like to have this. And instead you say, I love you, despite not knowing exactly what I love about you. We are in love.
Yeah, or how the person you love will change. And I think that's always sort of the fascinating thing. I mean, you did a video about how love is taking a risk. And I think that a big part of that is that you fall in love when you are young and healthy and full of dreams and hopes. And the risk that lovers take is, what will you be like as we get older? What will you be like through challenges? What will you be like as a parent? What will you be like through caring for your own family? You know, all of those permutations. Love is that risk of who that person becomes, not just who that person is.
Nice, yeah. Well said. Yeah, I like that. That's beautiful. Yeah, that's really good. And so we have this idea of like pure love, which is impossible. And so we make up for that by saying maybe pure love is exactly the fact that we can't define what pure love is. Now, here we're starting to get to a difference between Aristotle and Plato. Plato would have agreed with that assessment. There is no such thing as pure love. Instead, pure love is the development of not being able to say what pure love is. This is also Plato's idea of friendship, ultimately, is that you can't define friendship. Instead, you have to talk together about what friendship is, and that is what friendship is. Friendship is having someone else to debate the conditions of friendship. And so Plato has ultimately, and he doesn't, it's not just a cop-out. Like, it's not just that he applies this to everything. But in a sense, Plato says that things don't have to be named in order to be concrete. Things don't have to be set in stone. You're working your way up towards an ideal, which is a reflection of the pure form of what that is, the essence. And Aristotle has a totally different sense of what makes something real. For Aristotle, it's very much that it has to be named. This is the beginning of formal logic, in a sense, for Aristotle. It's about, it's a very zoological approach. It's a taxonomical approach. It's about going around the world and collecting things. Aristotle was an avid collector and really trying to nail everything down. Now, before we say that this makes Aristotle the first scientist, he was not the first scientist, first of all. Secondly, he did not actually develop a scientific method. A lot of what he did is he was almost like a Sherlock figure, which is that he basically collected secondhand information from all his informants. He sort of bragged about the fact that like every beekeeper in the land would write reports for him, and every fisherman, all that stuff. And he wasn't, and this means that he wasn't always accurate. Like
Well, he was like a naturalist. Like, he was someone who was really interested in observing nature and trying to quantify it and discuss it.
That's one of the things. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's early Aristotle. Yeah, absolutely. Naturalist, zoologist, botanist, all these things. Like, one of the amazing things about Aristotle is just the range of his thinking and the range of his curiosity. And he was a genuine polymath in that everything was something that he wanted to be an expert at. This is also very different from Plato. So Plato is interested in things like mathematics, etc. But the school, the academy, was purely for teaching philosophy. Whereas Aristotle went much further and was teaching everything. You know, he was teaching geometry, was teaching poetry, was teaching politics, was teaching zoology. I mean, everything became part of it. And Aristotle was, the thing is, Aristotle was not particularly liked. It's sort of important. Like, we don't know that much, but it's important to note that, like, even when Aristotle was a student of Plato's, one of his earlier writings was on rhetoric, which was a very, what you have to understand is it was a very provocative thing to be writing about, because at the time rhetoric was considered the tool of the sophists and not something that was to be taken very seriously, which actually has continued today. Rhetoric is not a big field of study within theory as such, something which I've personally been trying to change. I don't want to talk about this too much, but one of the things that I've always talked about is a chiasmic theory of philosophy, which is a rhetorical formalism of philosophy. Anyway, blah, philosophy jargon, enough of that. Writing the rhetoric, and he got slammed for it. I mean, we actually know a lot about Aristotle simply because of like all the how much people wrote about how much they hated his work early on. And so he's a polymath who's interested in everything and really wants to bring everything together into a unifying approach. Now, this doesn't make Aristotle a system builder. He's not trying to create a system that he applies to the world. Instead, Aristotle has a reversal, which is, I'm going to look at the world and I'm going to aggregate information, data, which is not for him measurements. He's actually not that interested in measurements, even though things were measured at the time, like butchers, etc. He's more interested in sensory perception, experience. For him, experience is a form of data, and then using that to say what can be said and what can't be said. In other words, create a system that you could then have as a system. So there's, if you will, there's a very different axis of gravity here, or whatever, which is that for Plato we have the system, the idea of ideal forms of pure essences, from which we derive understanding of what's in the world. And for Aristotle, it's the other way around. We look first towards what's in the world, what is in the objects, what is in the matter, and then we go from that, we go towards thinking about the system itself, which is It's a simplification, but this is sort of one of the differences.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah, and so this is something that's fairly like basic about the difference between Aristotle. However, they're actually much closer than you would think. And there's a lot of Plato's work that comes through in Aristotle. And a really good example here would be the Politics. So Aristotle's Politics, you could think about as sort of his version of doing what Plato did in the Republic. It's thinking about what is the ideal form of a society. And how does a society fit together? Remember, for the Republic, we had res publica, the public works, or in Greek, the politeia, the community. At the time, as you probably all know, it wasn't about nation states, it was about the Greek city-state, in particular, in this case, Athens, which was culturally the most dominant city-state. And one of the things that Aristotle is really interested in is, it's an ontological question, which is, what are things for? And what is the way in which things are, let's say, being used for their natural function? And part of what makes like Aristotle perfect for analytic philosophy is he's inherently conservative in the sense. And I mean conservative not as in like likes to
Not politically conservative.
yeah, well, yeah, I mean there's a political conservative element to it. What I mean is that he believes that there is an order to which things should subscribe. That there is a natural way in which things should be or should not be. And that if we move towards that natural way, we will reach a state of eudaimonia, which is usually translated as being happiness in the eudaimonian ethics. But it's not actually happiness in like, ha ha ha, I'm so happy. It's more happiness in terms of well-being, of like things that fit, like things that basically that fit really well together. Let's see, there's a comment coming in here. Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, we'll put the link up. We will eventually. And so, are you still with me? Does this make sense? Yeah, I'm trying to like weave a couple of different things here without making it too difficult. And so, yeah, so basically this idea of well-being, of harmony, that everything's sort of together, which in a sense is not all that different from what Plato is arguing. Where he is very different, and one of Aristotle's most unique arguments is the idea of what Aristotle calls the political animal. And the political animal is something that I used to teach often in my introduction to political science class, because it's a really interesting puzzle. It's also important to note that Aristotle thinks that the world is essentially a puzzle, and it's a puzzle that we can solve, which is not something that Plato would ever believe. Not something that Plato would ever advocate. For Aristotle, the world is an organon. It's something that is like, there's pieces of the puzzle, they're all around us in the world and in nature, and you can basically find that and like bring it all together. Someone in the comments just said that they're going to sign up to the Patreon, which is amazing. That's super cool. We appreciate you. Thank you for keeping us, I don't know, thriving with this. And okay, so Aristotle has in the Politics the idea of the political animal. And he says, remember, he's looking for what is the natural way for a society to be structured. Again, very conservative instinct, which is how should something be according to its nature. This is, you know, when conservatives today complain about like transgender rights, they'll usually say something like, it's not natural. And so that's something that Aristotle was very much concerned with, the what is natural, what is not natural. And he's saying here, this is a very, very interesting idea, which is that man, I mean here mankind, or should we say humankind, political correctness?
No.
Whatever, you guys know what I mean. Mankind takes on its natural form by moving away from nature. That what makes mankind unique is that to be in nature is unnatural. And this is also why, like, I could never be one of those total, like, hippie, go back to the woods, community people. It's not natural for me to be in nature. I like going into nature because I get tired of other people. But I will grow tired of nature very quickly. And you shouldn't be too comfortable in nature. This is not a good thing. Like it's okay to go camping, to enjoy civilization a little bit more, or to be in touch with whatever. But you shouldn't just be like, I'm going back to my natural state. That is not your natural state. That is a fantasy. And Aristotle's very aware of this. He says just being in nature is not something that is natural to us. What is natural to human beings is to be together, is to be part of a community. What is natural to human beings is to organize in a collective. In other words, to become a political entity. And this isn't even politics in forms of an institution. This simply means that as soon as you, as anyone knows, as soon as you are with other people, it becomes political because you see them in a way that doesn't correspond to how they see themselves, and vice versa. There's misinterpretation. And a community is trying to figure out how do we relate to each other. That is the origin of sort of political interaction, is how do I represent myself in a way that is acceptable towards others and vice versa. Political representation. And so man is a political animal because man is in his most natural condition when he is moving out of nature. And so man actually inhabits a very paradoxical space here. And this is unique for Aristotle according to mankind, which is that man is in a sense the exception that proves the rule. Man is that which moves away from nature in order to actualize the natural within something totally non-organic. A political community, a society, is not an organic structure. And so what happens is that this means that there is no primordial oneness. There's no pure nature that determines what a society is, which is something that would have been closer to Plato's universe in the Republic. It's not that what's in the world is a copy of some eternal form. Instead, it's actually coming into being almost as like this uncanny, third, excessive, experimental object. And he looks at the family. And he says the family, again, has like a conservative, natural way of being a family. There's a certain hierarchy that Aristotle has in mind, where the man is at the top, then we have the woman, then we have the slave. Aristotle also refers to slaves as speaking tools, which is kind of horrific and at the same time very, very truthful. Because the worst thing to say about a slave is like, oh, they're just here because they like being here, because I'm a really good master. Like, that's super messed up. But in a sense, to like put them in the hierarchy as speaking tools is quite honest. And he's preceding and foreshadowing what Hegel will say in the master-slave dialectic. Because one of the things that Hegel says is that the master enjoys the fact that the slave pretends to be an object. Because the thing is, like, I could get a machine to do something for me, like a Roomba. And at the same time, a lot of people employ house cleaners because they like, at some unstated level, that there is someone who is not being themselves for a couple hours and instead is being a house cleaner. That's the master-slave dialectic. Of course, today we've sort of like created this self-awareness where people, again, go back to the, oh, I'm employing the house cleaner because I want to help them have a job, I want to give them money, etc., which is like, that always makes me a little bit sick, you know? Like, and it's, anyway, I don't find this to be very truthful necessarily. If you really want to help people out in life, give them money. Don't create dirty toilets and then ask for them to clean it and then say that your toilet is now the object of the self-realization of your house cleaner. Like, that's just fundamentally dishonest to me. But we can discuss this further in the comments. And so Aristotle has this idea of like, what is the natural unity of the family? And then how is that then reflected within the public sphere, right? We have the private sphere, we have the public sphere, and so on and so on. And it's always about this, like, where does something come from? Like, what is the natural purpose or origin of something? And someone in the comments earlier said that there's a relationship to psychoanalysis. And it's actually very true because one of the examples that Aristotle often uses is the relationship between a larvae and like a butterfly that comes out of it. And a larva is in a sense very indeterminate. You look at different larvae, and unless you're like a naturalist.
Caterpillar.
No, larva in particular. Is it not a larva?
No, I think.
Oh, is it caterpillar for a butterfly? I think
yes.
so this may be, I'm not sure, someone who's a biologist can help us, but I think that a caterpillar is a form of larvae, is it not? In a sense? Or it starts as a larva? I'm not sure.
Okay.
I don't know. But basically, I mean, it's totally possible that I'm totally, like, I'm not a biologist, so I'm just full of crap when I talk about this stuff. But the idea, what I was going to say is that the word for butterfly in Greek is actually psyche. And so the psychology here, and the idea of psychology isn't just the idea of like a soul or something like this. It's specifically about that transformation from caterpillar or larvae towards a butterfly. It's that which comes out of the shell, which is the shell is the foreshadowing of what the human vessel, like it's the vessel in a sense. And so the relationship between psyche and psychology and all that stuff is already there in Aristotle, which is quite interesting. And so one of the things that Aristotle is really interested in is the difference between form and matter, between a form of universal in particular. And form and matter don't have to be universal in particular. He actually inverts it a little bit.
Okay.
Am I going too fast here?
Yeah,
I can see I'm losing you a little bit here.
I'm catching up.
That's okay. Do you want to slow it down with a question or something? Or
no, I'm good.
Are we still okay?
Yeah, I'm there. Hydration check.
Yeah, I think we're doing pretty well on time. So we're talking about the political animal. We're talking about the way in which, like, he's looking for the natural state of a society, how man is a political animal, how man is a paradoxical being. In other words, man emerges as a certain split, as a certain difference, if you will, between the natural order and the unnatural order, and cinches them together. And man has a very unique position here. Man is like the measurement of the natural within the unnatural. It's the relation of the eternal, again, to the infinite as a finite existence, something like this. So what's kind of important here is that I've talked about the fact that Aristotle is considered the first logician. And what really makes him the first logician? Well, one of the things is that he's very interested in predicates. What can be said about something, what cannot be said about something. And the famous one that he has is a logical square. And the logical square, you can look this up. I've also put it in the lecture notes. Very brief plug. If you're watching this and you'd like to have the study guide, it's a two-page document with everything I've said here boiled down into a digestible form. You can find that through our Patreon. That's you can find the link in wherever I put the link. I don't know. And so you can get the lecture notes where I've included this these things. And they're basically 4 steps. It's like we have universal affirmatives, universal negatives. We have particular affirmatives, particular negatives, which is, I don't know, for example, all men have hair, or all men don't have tentacles. And then we have some men have, or some men have, I don't know.
Hair.
I mean, etc., right? Okay.
Yeah.
You sort of get the gist. And it's on a square and sort of the horizontal vertical axis. Where it gets a little bit difficult here, though, is like, think about a unicorn, for example. If we say that all unicorns have a horn, that we can say that without having to talk about whether or not unicorns exist. But if we start saying that some unicorns have a horn, or some unicorns don't have a horn, then we're already in a universe of, like, we've already taken for granted that they exist, and we're looking for others. That's not a good example, but like...
No, it is a good one, because then we're just describing a horse. A unicorn without a horn is just a horse.
Yeah,
basically. So it's...
Yeah, so very quickly, the way in which we create these predicates and how we link them to qualities says something about the essence of the thing, like inversion. And so what's kind of funny here is that actually, you may not know this, which is that, and it's sort of always kind of surprising even to me. I talk a lot about Lacan. And Lacan is this famous theory, which is the theory of sexual differentiation. Basically, Lacan says there is, well, I don't know. Okay, should we go here? Yeah, I think we should go here. Which is...
We got time.
Yeah, il n'y a pas de rapport sexuel. About sexual differentiation is one of Lacan's most famous theories. And I'll explain what it is. But first, what's interesting to know about that is that Lacan actually uses Aristotle as a starting place here. And it's Lacan's theory of the not-all. So what Lacan basically does is that he rewrites Aristotle's square. And how does he rewrite it? In a very interesting fashion, which is that the way in which Aristotle's square is usually formulated, and the way in which logicians tend to proceed, is through contradiction. And when you have contradiction, you have 2 sides. Let's say you have a dividing line, you have something that is and something that is not. And you go from there. You have universals that are and that are not, and then you have particulars that are and that are not. And then you build this whole system on this. And it's possible that that's not even really what Aristotle has in mind. I mean, Aristotle is a little bit more of a sophisticated thinker than all that. And so Lacan is pointing towards, what if we just rephrase the way in which we put the contradictions? Where contradictions are not between something, instead contradictions are immanent. Contradictions exist within the entity themselves. And the way that he, I know that's a bit abstract, but the way that he does that is basically, instead of saying all men have limbs, or all humans have limbs, he says it's like a double negative almost. So not all men don't have limbs, etc. I mean, so it's basically, you can go to the lecture notes. I didn't write down exactly what the formulation is, but basically what he's trying to introduce here is that when we work within the logical square of Aristotle, we're just saying that one thing is or is not. And we've created this idea that there's a binary between things being and not being. And what Lacan is actually saying is that you can't assume that the binary is constitutive. In other words, if you say that something is, you're already assuming that something is not. And he says, what if we just instead reverse it? What if we don't give primacy to that which is and that which is not, but we actually say that the concept of being is, is to not have the predicate of being not.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that the concept of not being is to not have the predicate of being.
Right.
And so he sort of like inserts a double negative or like a lack or something into this idea.
Yeah.
Now, why would that be interesting? Like when you hear that, you think of it as just sort of like a language game.
Right.
You were gonna say?
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
Are you too hot? Is that the
No,
problem?
no.
Because there's a lot of sun on you right now.
There's a direct sunbeam.
Do you want to
No,
sit
I'm
in the
okay.
back seat?
No, I'm okay. Thank
Are
you.
you
I
sure?
promise. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I want
I'm
you to
good.
be comfortable. You're like a stand-in for everybody else. It's funny because every once in a while people see clips from this class and they don't know that you teach class, and so they always write to me like, "You sexist pig, you're just talking for an hour." And then I'm like, "Yes, but on Friday, Jenlene is the sexist pig." we take turns. We take turns being sexist pigs. Exactly. If that makes it better. And okay, so
no, I'm following you.
Yeah.
It is abstract. I think examples help. I
But
know
that's
you've
okay.
got it in the lecture notes. I'm with you.
Yeah, and I'm not even. We still have 15 minutes. I always try to put the most difficult stuff towards the end, or the stuff where I'm the least good at explaining it. And so, to go back to Lacan's theory, right? We've already established here. What if contradiction is not between things? What if contradiction is immanent? What if contradiction actually occurs within the thing itself?
Right.
And to make that a little bit more vivid, think about sexual difference. This is what Lacan's writing about in a sense, because he says when we have a man and a woman, to keep it within that binary for now, a man and a woman, you could say that there's a binary, but it's not really a binary. Like we think of it as like black and white, but like, it's not black and white. The idea of maleness only really exists within the universe of femininity and vice versa. And so it would be misleading to suggest record every class, but on Patreon you can always find a download of this class.
Yeah.
So we have 3 versions: YouTube, Instagram, and then we have the podcast version. So I think we've covered all of our bases. So I think I want to end very briefly here, which is that we've just done, in a sense, I know that there's like a big climactic ending here, but it's like we did a first of all, in the prologue, I put my cards on determinacy or lack within being itself. And then we set that up through the pre-Socratics. We talked about the difference between Parmenides and Heraclides, Parmenideism, monism, Heraclitean proto-materialism, the difference between being and becoming, Zeno's paradoxes, whether or not becoming exists, which Zeno did not believe existed. Then we went into Plato, and I suggested that Plato uses the analogy of the cave to actually, in a sense, not solve this problem, but to illustrate this particular problem. And then finally, we're now in the universe of Aristotle being Plato's student. And I really actually dislike this narrative where we just see Plato and Aristotle as being at odds, and since then it's like, totally different. It's a little bit more like Catholicism when we go to Descartes, when we go to Hegel, when we go to Marx. These questions about the particular between form of a work. And I think that's a useful thing, I hope. Because it's taken me a long time to distill that, to really get to that point. And so I'm trying to give people a little bit of a shortcut into that stuff.
Yeah. Overwhelming.
And reductive, yeah.
Exactly. If you don't choose sort of the buoy to hold on to carry you through that study. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not even a theme. Aristotle is something out of Platonist today. Esther could not have thought. There's a limit to what can be thought within a human lifespan. And so it's always learn together to then push that forward. A philosopher doesn't want disciples. A real philosopher wants people who will fundamentally uproot what he's done.
Yeah.
That's what I believe, at least. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for joining us today. Plus, we also are going to upload this as a podcast. So if you'd like to join the Discord or the Patreon, and I just want to, you were going to say?
And I was going to say, and we're also as this lecture without rewatching the full hour or listening to it again. I really recommend subscribing to that tier on our Patreon, because it really means a lot to us, and we really love doing this. So thank you for your support.
We super appreciate it. The Patreon is what keeps this project going. The Patreon is what gives us financial impetus. But actually, I've also, and like, you are literally invested at that point. So if you've watched this and you've enjoyed this, it starts at just $5 a month. The link is in my Instagram bio, or you can find it on the YouTube About page. It's www.patreon.com/Julian. It would be absolutely wonderful if you considered joining. Even a $5 subscription actually makes a huge difference. It's because it's about the multitude, it's not about the individual.
Yeah.
And finally, Jenlene and I are not done yet, which we're also going to record as a podcast. So our $5 patrons can either join the live discussion for the next hour, or you guys can download it and listen to it later as a podcast. So if you're watching this right now, thank you for joining. We hope that you'll go to the Discord. We're going to take a 5-minute break before we start our bonus discussion. If you would like to join the bonus discussion or download it, send us a DM and we'll try to get you signed up. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us this morning, and we shall see you